Hi everyone, this is Dr Raquel Butler from Integrated Veterinary Therapeutics.
And Sophie Vandenberg from Equine Posture. And we welcome you to the Equine Functional Posture Podcast, your ultimate source for insights into the influence of functional posture on biomechanics, health, and overall well-being of horses.
Whether you're a seasoned equestrian, an equine professional, or simply a horse enthusiast, this podcast is designed to help you understand the critical aspects of functional posture.
Tune in each week as we discuss practical tips, delve into expert interviews, and explore the latest research in the impact of functional posture on equine anatomy, physiology, movement, and more.
Let's create a world where we empower our horses to be in a mental, emotional, and physical balance. So, welcome to this episode on equine functional posture. How are you going today, Soph?
Really well. We are obviously talking about the very start of our podcast today, so I'm super excited.
Yeah, it's so exciting to kind of get this out there a bit more into the world. And I don't know about you, but like one of my visions, even from when I was really young, I remember thinking one day I just want to change the world. And then I realized the world I want to change is the one for horses. So hopefully this podcast, helps people to enhance their knowledge and just like create some different ways of thinking, and specifically about the importance of posture. So if I say to you, equine functional posture, what does that mean to you?
I mean, posture is about the space that your body occupies, both when you're moving and when you're standing still. And if you relate that to the horse and to being functional, that's their ability to have postures that are, that allow them to move through ranges of motion and to propel themselves and their, into all sorts of different positions that they might need to be in to, carry out any kind of athletic performance or just day-to-day wandering around the paddock, low-level stuff, trail riding, anything that you can think of, them having the motion through their body to move into any position that they need to be in, really.
Yeah, like it's really really creating like an efficiency in that motion, and a comfortable motion as well. Like one of my favorite terms is functional dysfunction. And so for me in that moment, like none of us are perfect, like no body is perfect. We have horses that have injuries, or, they might have had trauma from birth, which we'll talk about in a podcast, but, they have kind of asymmetries and challenges within their body. So they're not going to be necessarily perfectly aligned, but it's like, how can that system be as functional as it can be to create that comfort and efficiency, and then optimize everything that you were talking about there, like their athletic performance, and whether that is trail riding, even moving in the paddock, and how much that's going to, if everything is functioning as well as it can within its state, then we're going to minimize the strain and the risk of injury, and have horses, that are able to be ridden for a longer period of time, because we know that riding is a physical challenge for horses. So we need to set them up in this functional posture to really help them.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, every horse is going to have their own issues and come with whatever history they've had, whether that's like injuries, birth trauma, issues they've had from developing a dysfunctional posture. But even though every horse is going to be totally unique, their conformation, their size, breeding, it's applicable to every horse, because every horse has a body, and everybody ever needs to move in order to survive. So it's applicable to absolutely everybody. And just to optimize their performance, if that's, what you're doing with your horse, and their athletic ability, just for comfort and well-being that comes internally from having, a lack of discomfort and the ability to move around comfortably.
Yeah, and like what I see in horses that do have a really good functional posture is that they're really like they're safe horses in terms of their ability to respond to their environment. They're also able to um like process their environment. They're able to adapt to motion. They're able to be independent in their movement as well. So if we are riding them, you know, they're in what we call self-carriage. But I guess, you know, the question is, well, what even is self-carriage? Because we probably all have a little bit of a different visual of what self-carriage is and a little bit of a different opinion. So like how do you view self-carriage?
Self-carriage is, how a horse carries themselves. Horse is always suspending their thoracic between their two front legs. So you can say they're always carrying themselves around, but the way in which you do it either enhances or detracts from your abilities to go around comfortably and have sustainable movement. So when you carry yourself well, you have the ability to, you know, keep your structures moving freely. They have very good circulation through all of the muscles and the tissue because there's no constriction of the fascia around, fascia runs around all of your blood vessels and nerves, muscles, bones, absolutely everything. And so when all of that is functioning well, you have, a dynamic tension that allows you to be in a position that is strong through your core and your spine and holds you in a safe position for your own body.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned a couple of things there. Like you mentioned that horses are suspended between their front legs, so that's called the thoracic sling. And horses don't have a bony connection like we have. So we have a clavicle that joins our forearms, our forelegs, our arms onto our body. And so that stabilizes our limb attachments. But horses only have a muscular connection from the forelimbs to the body. And so being able to suspend the rib cage between those front legs is a really important part of self-carriage. When that happens, because under dissection, I do an exercise where I show what happens when when a horse lifts through the sternum. And when a horse lifts through the sternum under dissection, like you see how easy it is for the head and neck to lengthen and breach and lift at the base of the neck. And for me, that's self-carriage, like a horse that's really well suspended between their front legs, open in their throat and lifted in the base of their neck. And then what you'll see is like the space behind the wither fills up because they come up in there. And then what I call that is the brakes, right? The handbrake. So if that's all lifted and activated, then the power of the hind limbs can actually come through and generate that power in movement, generate that forward motion, and engage and utilize all the joints, all of the spine and all of the joints in the legs to actually produce the power that travels through the front end. And then it can create more lift in the front end as that power kind of comes through. So for me, that's the picture of self-carriage. And the other thing, is in that motion, the there's patterns of movement that have been established. So like the neural pathways have established patterns, and there's central pattern generators which allow that movement to become automatic. And so what we want to do is promote this functional posture to be an automatic posture in movement and in standing, and that they can carry themselves so that when we sit on them, it's the most amazing feeling when they're carrying themselves and you're just sitting there, like you don't have to do anything. Like you don't have to be on the reins, you don't have to be on your legs, you don't have to kick harder. Like they are just, it's I felt it a few times, and I've ridden a lot, but I felt it a few times. It's like the most phenomenal feeling, and I think the horse feels so like powerful in that moment. But if we can just come back to that safety aspect again, because I think that's really important. Like, have you noticed that when you've worked with horses where they have improved posture, have you kind of noticed an improvement in their like awareness of their legs? So do you feel safer basically when you're working on a horse that's got good posture and body control?
Yes, and in lots of different ways. From, if you are working on the ground with a horse who has very good awareness of both where you are in relation to them and where all of their parts are in relation to themselves, they have a really strong desire to, put their feet in places that are safe. They don't accidentally step on you. They don't trip over obstacles that you might be trying to make your way around, such as poles in the arena, or when you're trimming your horse as well. I mean, horses that have the ability to, they've got to stand on one leg, whether it's the front or the back leg. It's a really big deal for the other one to take all of the weight at that end of the body, and to hold it in a static contraction the whole time that you're lifting the other one up, as well as shifting their weight around. The ability for a horse to move themselves into a position where they're not going to fall on you. And if they do, they have the awareness to keep you both safe is really valuable, regardless.
Yeah, although those horses that do have really good functional posture, like generally, yeah, they're much less likely to fall or to need to put their leg down. And you can see they put their legs in really good limb alignment. So like they'll have a really good limb position relative to their body. And I guess that brings us to, the discussion of like the effect of conformation and how that can influence functional posture. And, there certainly are things that are specifically conformational, like conformation for me is bone structure, and things can become conformational. So say they had an injury as a young horse, that affected their bone development, their bone growth, then that can become a conformational issue if it stays that way and hasn't been rectified over time. So even like we've mentioned birth trauma a couple of times, like that can become conformational. And so, conformation also is the angles of the limbs, the length of the bones, the bone structure. So we can definitely see a difference in conformation between, say, an Arab and a Clydesdale, or a miniature pony and a warm blood. That's a big difference in their conformation. However, posture is how that conformation is organized. So it's where it puts that conformation a lot of the time in space once it can. What kind of things have you seen change where you thought it was conformational? Like you're like, oh yeah, that's a bony structural, thing in this horse that I'm not going to be able to change. What kind of things have you seen change that you thought were conformational, but they've altered? So you're like, well, it must be posture.
Most standout things are generally in the short term, say during a bodywork session. You'll often see the limb alignment will change for a horse, especially. That's often in a case where a horse often stands underneath themselves with their back legs or camped under. And when you say are working with people who have maybe a quarter horse, or horses that often typically have, very powerful hindquarters, they're the kind of horses that take off at speed for their general sports like barrel racing or reining. Sometimes that can be seen as a normal, but even though it's common, it doesn't have to be normal for the horse. And so sometimes when the balance of the muscles of the limb are improved, or the posture of the feet are also changed, the pelvic freedom and the ability for the pelvis to sit, neutrally rather than in a flexed or extended position,
So you've seen like pelvic angles change.
Absolutely. And also the other big thing often is the shape of the neck. You know, some horses look very dropped through the sternum between their front legs, which might be an indicator of poor self-carriage. And also, you know, they look like they have that sort of U-shaped neck where they don't have, you know, the beautiful
Where it's
bascule through the
curved
neck.
underneath, like curved downwards underneath.
Yes. And so sometimes changes like that I've seen have been more long term. You know, in horses that I've had personally over the space of 2 years, you see that the entire shape of the neck changes. So there's short term and long term changes, but those are just two examples.
Yeah, and I think the how quickly something changes really has a big dependence on age, you know, because I mean horses are growing up until anywhere between 6 and 8 years of age. And so depending on that bone remodeling stage, you know, we can have really big influences on conformation. So we might have foals that are born where we think, oh, it's got terrible conformation, but if we can influence their hoof balance and their body structure alignment, we can straighten a lot of those foals and again have a huge impact on their overall conformation and what that becomes, and their posture. And I wanted to share, like, I remember I've had a couple of horses now that have been through, not my own horses, but like horse owners, where horses owners horses that have been through vet checks and they've had roach backs. And the horses, and a roach back is a curve, upward curve in the lumbar. And so the vets have said to them, it's conformational that the horse has a roach back. It's part of their conformation. But that's one thing that I thought as a vet was conformational. And then I've now understand that it's generally a postural problem, even if they are young. And I've seen horses get a roach in a matter of weeks from an injury, you know. So I had a 18-month-old that I was treating years ago that I treated as a foal. So I knew she was actually really lovely and balanced. And then all of a sudden she got this roach. And it took ages for the owner to figure out what had happened. But what had happened was she got chased. She put her in a paddock with other horses and she got chased, like really chased. And so there was a lot of twisting and turning. And as an 18-month-old, the stifles are like really open growth plates. And so her stifles got really sore. And because of the way that her sorry, I knocked my microphone. Because of the way that her stance changed, she roached. And that stayed there for quite a period of time. So the roach back for me is something that I now recognize as a postural problem that can become conformational if we don't address the underlying cause and we don't look at you know, what's going on there. And we're going to do an episode kind of talking about roach back later on. So you mentioned hoof balance before. So what kind of like influences have you seen on posture, and even like how do you see how the hoof influences the functional posture like?
So, I mean, when you consider hoof movement and you're thinking about how it interacts with the ground, your observations of the hoof might include, you know, how does it land? Does it land mediolaterally, or does it land heel first, toe first? You know, does the horse take even steps on each one, as well as your, you know, other, when you feel the hoof and you assess it from the bottom, you know, does the horse have any sort of issues like thrush, or, you know, just any hoof health observations. And then you can say, well, how the horse lands on the hoof, you know, the way the leg travels through the air and lands on the ground is controlled by their muscles. And so anytime that a horse is working hard to, you know, avoid landing in a specific way, increases, you know, concussive in a different form if it's a way.
Yeah. And then we need to think about whether they're shod or barefoot and how that's going to influence, and then how that's going to impact that
Them.
hoof balance and how it changes. So yeah, that's really important. You cut out there for a minute, so I just jumped in.
Oh, thanks.
Um,
Um,
so we were just talking about, yeah, how the hoof balance, and I just mentioned that you know, it depends on whether they're barefoot or shod and how that's going to impact the hoof in the way that they land, and also, you know, that's going to have an impact on the body as well, whether they're landing on a barefoot or shod horse. And we will do a podcast on the effects of hoof balance
absolutely.
posture, so we're going to go into that in a lot more detail.
Yeah. And of course, like you said, there's so many things, like such as your young horse that's being chased around their friends in the paddock. And obviously there are a multitude of influences. Tell me a little bit about one of, you know, or many of the influences that, you know, affect posture.
Yeah, like I think the environment is pretty massive, right? Like, you know, if they're in a group, if they're in a herd situation, they're going to get injuries. And sometimes we might notice when they get an injury, but sometimes we might not know that they slipped in the paddock yesterday. And if we're not regularly working with them, we might not notice that they're finding a certain movement difficult. So an example of that, you know, I have Ellie Mae, my 4-year-old, in the paddock. Now, I've seen some of her falls. I know of some that she had previous to me getting her. So I know she fell in a water trough. I've seen her come round a corner and her hind end slip out from underneath her. And, you know, I know recently, like even since we moved recently, and I know that she injured one of her front legs. I think she got it stuck in the mud in the dam. And then just recently she injured a back leg because I noticed her posture, like the way she was standing, which we're going to talk about, like the importance of that observation. And so the environment in terms of that, like what terrain they're on, how much they're moving, whether they're in with other horses, whether they can get kicked, how they're eating in their environment. So are they getting different feeding positions? Are they always eating from the ground? And I think movement's massive, and most of our horses, if not all of our horses, don't have enough movement compared to what they would get in a natural environment, and they don't have enough variation in the terrain that they're moving across. So we need to think about that. So yeah, we've got those environmental influences, the injury influences, and like what about you know, what do you find with horses kind of metabolically? Like have you found that horses that say have been diagnosed with say Cushing's or
That's a good one, because
yeah,
that's a particular condition that affects the you know, the large muscles of the body. They can get atrophy through the gluteals, as well as the neck muscles, the triceps along their back. And then you have a change in you know, the urination, all sorts of different things that are part of systems of the body that include the whole body health, you know. And that, what you were just saying about movement, conditions like Cushing's, where you have increased lethargy, or you know, that's going to decrease their willingness to go and move and to get out and to go around. And it also gives them a predisposition towards conditions like laminitis. And then it ties into the whole system again, where, you know, any systemic issues that they have, or Jelly, who has his muscle condition. You know, they're things that change him on a day-to-day basis, especially with the you know, his comfort depending on the diet, the weather, how he's been moving, any stress that he's having. You know, it changes on a day-to-day basis, and that adds a you know, just an extra thing for owners to be aware of and considerate of, especially if you're working your horse. You know, for a horse that has, say, even EMS, you know, and is having some hoof troubles, how is that going to change day to day for your horse? Did they get a nibble of grass? Has the weather changed for them? The ground is very soft today and it's hard tomorrow.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of factors that come together to influence your horse with their metabolics.
Yeah, and I think, you know, what you said there about like they can change on a daily basis, like often we don't consider that. And I think Jelly has, well, even Patch, well, actually all my horses that I've worked with individually have highlighted that for me. You know, one day I'll go out and I'll be like, oh, they were awesome today. Like they looked great. They carried themselves well. And I'll be like, yeah, we're going good. And then the next day or a few days later, I'll be like, what the hell? And especially for Jelly, like you mentioned his muscle disorder, it's unbelievable. Like he's much better controlled now. So I know a bit more about how to keep him, like look after his muscles a bit better but I remember one time I took him to a clinic and my friend was there and she was like, oh, Jelly's looking great. Like I can really see the difference in his muscle tone and you know, the development of his muscles and his posture. And I'm like, yeah. I said, but you wait, you look at him this afternoon because I can't get him to eat his supplements right now. And so he's not going to look like that this afternoon. And he's locked up because we had to have him in a stable, so he didn't have grass. Sure enough, she saw him in the afternoon. She was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how he has changed over the day. So if I worked with him in the morning and say I went out and did a lesson, and then I worked with him in the afternoon, I have two different horses in a day. And we often don't consider that. Like, we're just like, well, I've been consistently working with my horse now for 3 months doing postural work, so they should be strong. But if they've got other things influencing them that change on a day-to-day basis, then they're not as strong as we can be. And I noticed that in my body as well.
About to say that. Yeah, just, you know, spending time with you and how often, you know, things change throughout the day based on the movement you've just done and whether or not it was good for you at this stage of the day. And, you know, how long's it been since you did the, you know, your most recent mobilizations or your activations, and yeah, just all the little things in your life that contribute to, you know, hour to hour difference. Your sleep even. And horses, you know, there are many reasons that horses sometimes don't lay down and get enough sleep, or it changes, their schedule changes. And because our schedule changes, sometimes we are not as regular for them either. And so we see them at different times of the day when they're being influenced in different ways, the temperature, heat, lots of things.
Yeah, and we also have to recognize there the influence of, say, going to a competition or something, and you talked about sleep and how that can impact posture. And, you know, when we go to a competition, like sometimes, or a clinic, or just take our horses somewhere else where they're staying overnight, if our horse doesn't sleep as they normally would at home, that can have a big impact on their posture the next day, like how quickly they fatigue, how they can hold themselves. And so like that's a really important consideration there, like that ability to rest. And they've also shown, like I'm sure again we'll talk about this further as well, like they've shown the importance of rest for development of new neural pathways. So if we are doing things to like improve our horse's functional posture, the importance of the rest in the moment of learning the new movement pattern and the importance of rest overnight to actually consolidate that new movement pattern. So we always think about it in terms of improving our horse's posture from a working perspective. However, sometimes that rest is
the brain perspective
the most
well.
important training we can do. Yeah, like the brain is recovering in that moment, the neural pathways are all developing, and yeah, it's quite amazing. Like if you give them that rest, the next day you go out and say you only did it a couple of times, but it was really good, and the horse, like, it was really clear they got it, and you didn't hammer it and you didn't keep going, and the next you might even do it in a few weeks time, and they're like, I've got this. Like, it's totally in there. And that to me is the importance of being really aware of your training. And also training them on the ground, so they can integrate these pathways without us, all our stuff on top of them.
Absolutely. And the horse is never just mapping one thing. They're mapping their whole body in the way that it has to move to accommodate the situation they're in. So if you're riding them sometimes at the same time as trying to do postural work, the postural work isn't just how I hold my body to carry myself. It's in that moment I'm also carrying you, and the influence of the tack and your hands and your seat on my whole body. And so it's almost not self-carriage, it's you and me carriage.
Yep.
Because it's not just me. Oh, well, you're the horse, it's not just the horse. It's the two of us that I'm trying to lift up and hold comfortably, which is a lot.
100%.
So as you were saying, let's say you have taken your horse, and you're starting to think about, how do I, start to read my horse's posture? How do I think about it? What do the different parts of my horse mean to me? You've got standing and dynamic posture. How are you going to visualize what parts of the posture are important to think about?
Yeah, and I think standing versus dynamic posture is the first bit to look at, right? Like, we have the way that our horses stand, and we'll go into a few of those points in a second, but posture is not just standing. Posture is what we just talked about in terms of self-carriage. So we have dynamic posture, how they hold themselves in all of the gaits, because they could have really good dynamic posture in the trot, but they struggle in the canter, or they struggle when you take that dynamic posture into lateral work or something. So there's dynamic posture in every moment of movement, every different gait, every different moment. In terms of the standing posture, some of the things that we talk about in the online course as well is like getting people just to observe your horse every day in the paddock, so looking at how do they urinate, what's their position when they urinate. Like, I treated a horse, it was a while ago now, that since she'd had the horse, which was 6 months, the horse had not been able to stretch out to do a full urination. Now, so its posture when it was urinating was really kind of almost crouched in the hind legs. It couldn't stretch out, and it would stand there and do a dribble, and because it was just so uncomfortable. So that urination posture said a lot about that horse's function. And so their limb positions in the urination, their back positions, their head positions, do they do a full urination? Some horses will stand in a bit wide positions because they don't want to splash themselves.
Fair enough.
So we do have to take that into consideration. Some horses are cleaner than others. But, in a male horse, does their willy come all the way out? Like, or does it never come out and they're just like spray everywhere?
I know for quite a long time, I have had a horse who would always position himself on the downhill. And I think it's because he was just having, when he was doing going to the bathroom, it was just something that helped him relieve the pressure from the hind end. He just really put everything forward just to relieve everything, at the back end, while he had to position himself before he could do his business.
Yeah, and also then it comes back to, well, if you see your horse standing, like using things in the paddock to stand themselves in weird positions, like say you've got a tire in the paddock or a hill, and if your horse always goes and stands on the hill or the tire in a certain way, then you might be like, why do they, what are they offloading there? Like, what are they stretching? What are they offloading? Why are they choosing that position? So that's part of that information. It's like, and I say to my people on the online course, like, nothing is good or bad, but it's all information. And the more we can observe, the more we can know our horses, we can like understand how we can help them and understand if they're strong, and where they're at. So defecation is another one. Jelly has struggled with that. I think it's from all the damage he's had in his hind in the past, and he looks a bit less awkward now, but he still has his front legs quite underneath him and his back legs quite wide when he defecates. So, you know, I can see Ellie actually right now having a poo. Oh, it's a wee. And like she's just standing there, just nicely square, you know, it's
Right on cue as
yeah,
an
right on cue,
example.
just exactly in
Thank
my
you.
eyesight. But you know, and the same with the defecation, like it should look simple. They should Jelly also used to struggle to move if he was pooing. It was like, can't move, have to go into this awkward standing position. So now if he moves and poos, I'm like, oh my God, he's moving and pooing. He must be feeling good. So super important. What about grazing? What sorts of variation in grazing postures have you seen?
So many.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so I've obviously spent quite a lot of time with foals, and that is probably where I've seen the most exaggerated grazing postures, particularly in as they're starting to experiment with, instead of having this upwards posture, like reaching down from drinking from an udder
Yeah.
to reaching down and eating from the ground. So I've seen just predominantly very large split postures in front, where the front legs are sitting like really far apart and the horse dips down between their legs and leans. And then, when they move, they might put the other leg in front and then dip very low again.
Yeah.
Or, perhaps they take a step so that they are always putting one specific foot forward, which is very common. But sometimes we don't notice it unless you're looking for it and you're aware that's a possibility that might be happening. As well as horses who will often face on the uphill when they're grazing on a hill. They might position themselves with their stronger hind limb in a specific position, so it's taking more of the weight as they move around dynamically. And I've also noticed that as my own horses' postures have improved, they eat more of my pot plants up high. They enjoy reaching. I saw a video on my own phone just a few days ago of my own horse who was standing downhill and has turned around and taken a big bite from a tree, which would have been virtually impossible for him 2 years before, because he didn't have that motion available when he was eating.
Yeah, and looking for that variation in motion is really valuable to assess your horse's functional posture as well. Like, do they show variation in posture, or do they always do the same patterns, whether it's grazing, standing, moving, any of those things? So,
and posture also comes down to a small level. There's also postures of the head and jaw. Does your horse have, what does their TMJ, which is the joint between the upper and lower jaw of the horse, what's that health like? And the muscles of the head and the teeth balance that also become affected, just like bones in the body are affected by the muscles and everything and the way you move, same thing happens in the head. So as you're grazing and you're chewing, you're constantly reinforcing the way that you move, and that becomes, a pattern itself.
yeah. And I mean, we had a cool one yesterday that we were treating where the jaw was misaligned at the start of the treatment, and treating a scar on the gastroc tendon and
Just
releasing
down the back leg.
on the
That's on the
back
back.
leg,
Yeah.
and releasing some of those fascial lines, like the jaw aligned in that treatment, which was pretty amazing, and shows how, well, that jaw is going to have an influence on posture, but also how the jaw is influenced by other areas of the posture, which we'll also do a podcast on connections in the body. We've got lots to talk about over the next couple of minutes.
Always. And of course, grazing is moving.
Yep.
And so while your horse is moving, what kind of things would you be looking for?
Yeah, well, grazing moving is one of them.
Grazing,
And then, you can look at things like when they're moving, where's their head and neck? So for me, the head and neck is an indicator of the comfort within the body. So if your horse moves with their head and neck up, we don't want to like force it or tie it or what's the word? Like we don't want to, you know, force it into a frame or put it in a frame, because that head and neck position is actually telling us a lot of information about the body. So if they want to go around with their head up, then we need to figure out the pattern that's occurring, whether it's a movement pattern, an injury pattern, some kind of compensation, or some kind of pain somewhere. We need to figure out why is the head and neck in that position, or why do they want to. I've had horses like Pat. She used to hold her head and neck really low. I had a horse the other day I was treating where it felt like its head, you know, weighed 3 times as much as it did, because it just didn't have the strength to lift the head. So for me, head and neck position's massive. And back posture, obviously. So specifically behind the wither, when they're moving, like, does that lift? Does it drop? So like Ellie's not strong in movement right now. So when she trots, her back goes down. And so it's, you know, really poor postural stability. Whereas a really well-functioning horse in movement, their back will come up and it will be well supported. And so there'll be movement within the gait, like the spine will move relative to the gait that they're in. However, it'll be a well-supported spine with a lifting abdominal, not a contracting abdominal, a lifted abdominals, which then, you know, allows the muscles to be used in balance. None of those muscles are like sticking out or lines everywhere. You know, they don't look like they're got a big hamstring at the back of the leg and weak at the front of the leg. Like all of those muscles, there's not lines pulling through the body. And you see like an evenness in the way they're using their limbs. Is
And
there anything
system.
else that you?
Yeah, and you were just saying like you have the balance between, you know, muscles on the same side of a horse's body, such as balancing,
Yeah.
you know, the muscles around the stifle and across, you know, down around the tail and down the back of the leg. And then because the horse has a paired structure, you know, the left and right sides of the body, you know, they're not always perfectly symmetrical. You might be aiming for balance
Yeah.
over perfection, but you're looking to see, you know, is there parts of my body, of my horse's body on the left side and the right side that are different? You know, does my horse choose to put, you know, their right leg further forward when they're walking, or the left leg further forward? Does the right front limb or the left front limb stay on the ground longer while they're, you know, taking a walk? And does the spinal motion have a beautiful flow to it? You know, is it balanced? Does it
Yeah,
move
from
to
the
the left
nose
and
to the
right?
tail.
Yeah, all the way through the body. Does the rib cage move, you know, left and right equally, indicating that you have, you know, that motion coming all the way from the front of the body down to the back of the body, and it's all connected. As
Yeah.
one part of the body moves, you have a chain of muscles that reach between, you know, the tips of the back of the feet all the way up to the ears of the horse. And so you don't move one structure and not feel it. You know, the horse doesn't move anything in isolation. They're connected, and as things move, they have a recoil structure, and that's why, you know, muscles coming from different directions attach onto a bone in the middle, you know, so that they can fulcrum and move equally.
Yeah,
And
and I think that flow from head to tail, you know, in a well-balanced horse, like it does flow, and you don't see kind of one area that looks like say you don't see like a head going up and down a lot. Like if the head is just going up and down a lot, you're like, well, where is the movement not flowing through the rest of the body? Or if the tail's really still, why is it not flowing through the tail? Or if the tail's really swishy, why is the tail really, you know, so active in that moment when it's not flowing with the spine? And I was going to say, oh, I need to know where that beeps. And I was going to also oh, I lost my train of thought there, but
I was
it's
just thinking
that
about what,
flow, like really, really
yeah,
vital.
yeah, I was just thinking about you. You're talking about flow, and just like you think about the horse and it's in space, it might be standing or walking, but there are times when the horse is and isn't in contact with the ground.
Hmm.
What does it look like when the horse and the ground are in contact or not in contact? What kind of position are the limbs in, and are they, balanced from left to right? And
That's what I was going to say. Like, if we're
yeah,
looking at the balance of the body, front to back, left to right, we can utilize what we call the bony landmarks. So, where we can see points of the bony structures, which, you learn in the online course, like we learn about which bony landmarks you can actually train your eye to see, and to palpate, and we can look at them from side to side and compare them from left to right. And then we can look at them like from front to back to allow us to ascertain, the balance between the front and the back, like that sort of horizontal balance, and also the balance from left to right, which also translates to what you said about, how do they move left and how do they move right? Because some horses have a very different movement pattern. A, if they're moving to the left or the right, or B, if you're on the other side of them, they can have quite a different movement pattern. And even if they're not perfectly symmetrical, because their bone structure, nothing is symmetrical, but we definitely want a balance in that motion from side to side. Otherwise, how can we ask them to carry a rider if they can't even function themselves, in a balanced way, in a stable way from one side to the other? So that's like super duper important. So what would be like some takeaways, for our listeners, about equine functional posture? Like, what do you think are some of the important takeaways?
well, you just said, the interaction of the rider with, the horse, but that also includes, all the ways that the owner is really is influential in the whole system here. And that comes back to why it's valuable to think about or understand all the things we just talked about, because as an owner, the reason this is all applicable is because you are the main influence, of the horse's environment, of the
Yeah.
way that you work with them. It has a lot to do with, your personal knowledge and your ability to most people are advocating for their horses because people truly care for and love their horses and want them to be comfortable and expressive and curious. And it gives you power to advocate for your
Yeah.
horse and, to think critically about the tack that you utilize, knowing how it influences your horse, how does it work? And the more you know about your horse's anatomy and their physical structure, you don't actually have to know this exact bone, or this exact
Yeah.
muscle, nerve, artery, fascia, but to be able to say, I know what it looks like when my horse has a functioning, beautiful neck with, and they're comfortable to go to the left, and then knowing, well, how can I think critically about what I'm about to use? And,
Yeah.
what does it do to my horse? It's
Yeah.
very,
Yeah. And I think that functional, like having a horse in a functional posture often means that you don't need as much tack. And so, if you find yourself needing to put on side reins, or, use a bit more spur, or put on some sort of thing which sets your horse up in a posture, you need to ask yourself, well, why isn't my horse seeking that functional posture themselves? Like, why are they moving away from that? Like, and sometimes it's a real process to figure that out, and you might have to, you know, uh, get quite a team around you, which we're also going to talk about in a podcast, the importance of that team, because sometimes you might go to one person, they're like, no, it's just a training problem. No, you just it's nothing. you do just need more spur or more whip, but you know, a horse that is in a functional posture will be very willing. They'll be very you know, you won't need to push them. They'll be willing to stop, they'll be willing to go, they'll be emotionally, which we haven't talked about that much, but they'll be emotionally regulated, so they're not as likely to be those horses that get really anxious or really stressed. Like they'll be able to kind of regulate those emotions much better, which we will talk about. But also, you know, if you find yourself needing something, or you've like to help their posture, or you've noticed a change in their posture, then there might have been an injury in the paddock. And if you're doing kind of preventative functional postural work to always improve and maintain that posture, you're going to prevent your chances of injury, even in the paddock, because they'll be more stable and stronger. But you're also going to prevent the chance of them getting a compensatory injury due to like a really imbalanced pelvis an example, and then they end up with a front leg tendon suspensory injury or something because the pelvis is really unbalanced. So, you know, as we work with that equine functional posture, but as we work with their functional posture, we're going to improve their longevity, like their performance, their comfort, and ultimately our safety, because they'll be more aware of their body, they'll be better emotionally regulated, they'll be stronger.
Yeah, and on that note, just of safety, is the fact that we now have a plethora of evidence that suggests that nearly all of the undesirable behaviors we get from horses, biting, kicking, bucking, shying as well, you know, those are discomfort related behaviors. So if your horse is kicking when you pick up their back leg, you know, is that because their sacroiliac is, you know, unable to take the weight of standing on one leg? You know, and those behaviors decreasing can be a direct result of just comfort, and that's not behavior, but it increases your safety.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And sometimes, you know, it's discomfort and sometimes it's restriction, but either way, it's showing that the horse is not able to like comfortably or easily give you what you're asking for. So it's a form of communication. And I think what we see a lot with improvements in posture, and when we see our people in the courses like doing the functional postural exercises and stuff, like, you know, how much have we seen in terms of changes in people's relationship with their horse, like that the communication they're now getting from their horse, like it's been quite amazing, hasn't it, to see those changes.
Just huge. And also knowing something that's been really powerful for everybody is knowing when something is hard for your horse. Because if you can acknowledge that, and then you say, well, in order for us to have, you know, a good relationship, I might need to alter, you know, what I'm doing to stay below your threshold so that we can stay within, you know, the space of your tolerance and your ability, because you can't skip part of, you know, developing a posture and jump into something bigger. So if you can work with your horse and they can tell you, that's really hard for me, I'm not ready for that yet, you can be like, well, we're going to stay here, build you strategically and progressively. And your horse knows that. They recognize when you don't push them.
Yeah. And then that comes into everything we've talked about today. So the more you can observe, the more you're going to know when your horse is kind of struggling posturally. So you know, initially you might only recognize it once you get into a work situation, but as you become more observant and more knowledgeable in the area of functional posture, like you'll be able to pick it up, you know, every day, like just little things. You just might take a glance and be like, oh, not standing the same way today. Like, I wonder what's going on there. So your knowledge, your observation skills are so powerful in helping your horse. And that's what our aim is with this podcast, you know, is to really empower you with more knowledge and also for you to seek it yourself. And the importance of that functional posture in your overall horse's well-being. So yeah, I hope that you've enjoyed our first podcast episode. That's what it's called, our first episode. And we look forward to seeing you next week, or look forward to joining you next week. And thank you for joining us this week. See you later, everyone.
Bye.